Georgia, the birthplace of wine. Or so Georgians would have you believe. And they do have some credence. After all, this is the land of the Qvevri, a winemaking tradition that dates back over 8,000 years. But just across the border, the Armenian Wine cave in Armenia is home to the world's oldest known winery, dating back 6,100 years. And it's not just about ancient cellars. The same grapes used in both countries today are descendants of those that flourished in the region for millennia. So with such ancient legacies, surely both these countries must be modern-day titans in the wine industry, right? Let's uncork some numbers. Just for context, the two countries are fairly similar in terms of GDP. Georgia ranks 112th in the world, and Armenia isn't far behind at 118th. Now, when it comes to wine, in 2021, Armenia exported $11 million of wine, which landed them at 54th place in global wine exports. Not bad. But in the same year, Georgia pulled in a whopping $239 million from wine exports, 17th highest in the world. So despite their similar economic standing and a shared history of wine culture, Georgia manages to export 21 times more wine than Armenia in pure dollar terms. Which begs the question, why does the world have a disproportionate thirst for Georgian wine? Is Georgian wine simply better? During the Soviet era, central planners decided that Georgia would be designated the wine country, while Armenia would divert its resources, labor, and expertise away from their winemaking heritage to focus on producing brandy. At least that's the narrative I frequently heard recounted by Armenians. It's not wrong, and as much as I love blaming the Soviets for everything, this one's a bit of an oversimplification. The divergence between Armenian and Georgian wine can be traced back to the 19th century, when Georgia started looking towards French chateaux for inspiration, while Armenia was already distilling their surplus into brandy due to a lack of an organized market and an already flourishing brandy industry. Then, by the time the Soviets invited themselves into this equation, Armenia had already lost significant territory in the Ararat province to the Turks, a key region for wine production. So the Soviet decision to designate Armenia as the brandy country greatly accelerated an already existing trend. Initially, the eradication of private ownership and decolonization devastated Armenian and Georgian wineries alike. Beyond material loss, age-old vines, traditional know-how, and even entire winemaking communities vanished from both countries. Also during this time, Artsakh, a region with a wine culture of its own, and one responsible for contributing oak barrels that added a unique cherry flavor to Armenian wines, was regrettably established as part of Azerbaijan by the Soviets. This decision disrupted yet another vital artery of Armenian winemaking. Then came collectivization, which led to the industrialization of Georgian wineries aiming for quantity over quality, and ignored the nuanced regional practices necessary for Georgian wines. This had negative impacts on the quality of mass-produced Georgian wine, but the tradition of Qvevri, integral to Georgian winemaking, was quietly preserved by winemakers who saw themselves protecting their cultural heritage. Meanwhile, in Armenia, the wine industry, already stifled by previous policies, saw further decline as many vineyards were uprooted or repurposed. So when the Iron Curtain fell, Armenians had to rediscover the art of winemaking that had lost ground. But the Georgian wine production, geared towards mass market on the surface, and its ancient roots covertly preserved underground, was positioned for success on the global market. So how did these countries perform post-Soviet? Following the Soviet era, Georgian wine had carved a significant market in Russia, accounting for about 70 to 91% of its total exports. But in 2006, Russian authorities banned Georgian wine, citing poor quality and contamination issues. Now, I'm not saying this move may have been politically motivated. I'm saying Russia definitely tried to destroy Georgia's wine economy. And did they succeed? The initial shock of losing the Russian market was harsh on the Georgian wine industry, but it became a catalyst for change. With the Black Sea at its shores, Georgia had the opportunity to redirect its exports to the European Union and later on to Asia and beyond. This also compelled Georgian winemakers to raise their quality standards to meet the stringent demands of these new markets, effectively addressing the initial criticisms of the Russian authorities as well. This proved to be a boon for Georgian wineries, and eventually, when Russia lifted its ban, the Georgian wine industry was ready for a comeback. By 2021, Russia was back to importing over half of Georgian wines. In contrast, Armenia is landlocked and surrounded by Muslim-majority countries. Turkey and Azerbaijan are not exactly significant markets for alcohol, even had they not closed their borders to Armenia, while Iran notably has banned alcohol altogether. All in all, Armenia has faced more hurdles in opening up new markets. Geography and politics have been persistent bottlenecks limiting the reach of Armenia's wine for centuries. So, how did Armenia and Georgia seek to open up new markets? Georgia has been particularly active in signing free trade agreements, with a notable one being the DCFTA with the European Union. This agreement opened a massive market for Georgian products, including wine. Armenia was also set to sign the DCFTA in 2013, but famously broke it off to pursue membership in the Eurasian Economic Union. This union gives Armenia duty-free access to some other markets, but as you can see, the combined demand from these countries pales in comparison to Europe's thirst for wine. More recently, Armenia did sign the SEPA agreement with the European Union. However, while this agreement was definitely a step in the right direction, it still does not provide the all-encompassing trade freedoms that Georgia has. These trade agreements create a natural avenue for exports, but also potentially lower the cost of imported materials necessary for wine production. To supplement this point, an Armenian sommelier brought to my attention that the country's wine production costs are significantly impacted by importing bottles, corks, and nowadays, even more wine barrels from Europe. This adds a surcharge to each bottle of Armenian wine, and when coupled with smaller production volumes, affects their competitive pricing on the international market. But wait! There's more! Since 2018, Georgia also enjoys a free trade agreement with China, which is currently one of their fastest growing markets and one that is entirely absent from Armenia's export destinations. As you can see, trade agreements can make or break an entire industry. But what about policies closer to home? How are the Armenian and Georgian governments shaping their wine sectors? Governmental support has significantly impacted the wine industry in both countries. Georgia has long been proactive, channeling substantial resources into its Birthplace of Wine branding campaign. Government subsidies and even international bodies like the EU and UN have provided further assistance to Georgian wine producers. And this has paid off tremendously as Georgia's strategic approach has cemented its status on the global wine map. Armenia's awakening to the potential of its wine industry started much later. Since 2016, when winemaking was declared a priority sector, there's been a significant surge in investment, with over $85 million funneling into the sector, a tenfold increase from the preceding 5 years. The re-emergence of wine in Armenia is celebrated in vibrant events like Yerevan Wine Days and the Armenian Wine Festival. These are tourism magnets, and wine tourism in particular is flourishing in both countries. Still, the Armenian government has been playing catch-up, but is the worldwide recognition of Georgian wine merely the result of its excellent branding and market economics, or does it also reflect a higher quality wine than its Armenian competition? The essence of wine often lies in its birthplace, the terroir. Both Armenia and Georgia are situated near the 45th parallel, which is often cited as a sweet spot for grape-growing climate. It runs through many of the world's renowned wine regions. Both countries experience cold winters, allowing vines to rest, while warm summers with cool nights create ideal conditions for slower ripening grapes. This balance is crucial in producing high-quality wines. But while both countries have mountainous regions, Armenian vineyards tend to be at higher elevations, which tend to produce grapes that are more aromatic, flavorful, and acidic. And finally, much of Armenia's grape-growing regions boast volcanic soil, particularly around the Ararat Plain. This soil ensures excellent drainage but also stresses the vines beneficially, leading to grapes that produce distinctly strong flavor wines. But enough about the soil. Tell me which wine tastes better. Now, I am not a wine expert. My appreciation for wine began during my latest trip to Armenia, marveling at the mountains in Syunik. With every sip of Armenian wine, I felt a connection to my ancestors through the millennia-old Areni grapes. And when my glass was empty, my beard instantly grew longer, and when I woke up the next morning, my rating on chess.com had surged by 350 points. I don't know what's up with that. Fast forward to earlier this year when I was in Berlin, a Georgian wine shop caught my eye. A gracious host invited us in and unveiled an array of Georgian wines. In a display of hospitality that I had only previously experienced in Armenia, he kept pouring, and as we sipped through a dozen different Georgian wines, each was tasty in its own way. But in my totally unbiased and objectively true opinion, they fell just a little short compared to the fullness I had experienced in Armenian wines. But to add a more quantifiable perspective to this, I turned to the Decanter Wine Awards. In 2022, Georgia garnered 117 awards compared to Armenia's 35. But this disparity is expected given Georgia's significantly higher volume of wine production, as we discussed earlier, which in turn naturally provides a broader spectrum for winning awards. I fully realize that this next part isn't very scientific, but when I dived deeper, Armenian red wines scored an average of 90.1, slightly edging out Georgia's 88.7. The tables turned with white wines, where Georgia led with 88.1 against Armenia's 87.5. Finally, it's worth noting that 3 Georgian wines also received the Value Award, meaning they cost under £15. No Armenian wines have managed to earn this distinction ever. To give some kind of a satisfying answer, my conclusion from all this is that Georgia offers a wider variety of wines at a more competitive price point. But when it comes to the best of the best, the top Armenian wines take the edge over the top Georgian wines. I think ultimately, the tale of Armenian and Georgian wines is not a tale of superiority of one over the other, but a testament to resilience and adaptation. I encourage everyone to explore both these wines and share your discoveries. Try a new blend, try the smaller, undiscovered wineries, and savor these ancient flavors that have been passed down to us through centuries. Remember, it's not just wine you're sipping on, it's history in a glass.